That FBI Director Kash Patel may be out of a job in the coming months. 3 people with knowledge of the situation say President Trump and his top aides have grown tired of Patel and the unflattering headlines he's been generating recently, including using a government jet to visit his girlfriend and enlisting a SWAT team as her security detail.
4:12 a.m. Hennepin County, Minnesota. The temperature hovered at 19 degrees. Ice crystals covered the government building windows. Downtown Minneapolis was silent, but inside, a federal operation was reaching its breaking point. ICE agents stood outside Judge Layla Mahad's chambers. DEA officials flanked the exits. FBI forensic teams waited in unmarked vans. Over 90 federal officers converging on a single target. A judge, not just any judge, immigration court judge, community icon, Somali American trailblazer. The woman who had presided over 4,200 asylum cases. Approved 89% of applications. Celebrated as compassionate, honored as fair, but federal prosecutors had another word for her. Criminal. If you want the full truth about what happened, hit like so this story reaches more people. The investigation started with a rejected bribe. March 2025, an ICE deportation officer named Marcus Webb filed an internal complaint. He reported being approached by an attorney named Bashir Osman. The offer was simple: $15,000 per case. Asylum applications would be approved. No questions asked. Webb wore a wire for the next meeting. The recording captured everything. Osman described the system. Judge Mahad controlled the courtroom. Attorneys paid up front. Cases were decided before hearings began. Applicants didn't need legitimate claims. They needed cash. The price: $15,000 for standard approval, $25,000 for expedited processing, $50,000 for applicants with criminal records. Federal investigators opened a covert operation codenamed Broken Gavel. 7 months of surveillance followed. Wiretaps on Mahad's phones, tracking devices on her vehicles, undercover agents posing as asylum seekers, financial analysts monitoring her bank accounts. What they discovered went beyond courtroom corruption. Judge Mahad wasn't just selling verdicts. She was operating an immigration pipeline for cartel operatives, MS-13 gang members, Tren de Aragua enforcers, Venezuelan intelligence operatives, all entering the United States with fraudulent asylum approvals. Comment exposed below if you're ready to see how deep this goes. Federal analysts traced 847 suspicious asylum approvals between January 2023 and December 2025. Each case shared identical patterns. Applicants claimed persecution, provided minimal documentation, received approval within days. Standard processing took months. Mahad's cases took 72 hours. Investigators cross-referenced approved applicants with criminal databases. The results were staggering. 143 individuals with active warrants in home countries, 67 linked to known cartel operations, 28 flagged by Interpol for violent crimes. All approved for asylum by Judge Layla Mahad. One case stood out. Carlos Mendoza, Venezuelan national, applied for asylum in July 2024, claimed political persecution by Maduro regime. Mahad approved the application in 48 hours. But Mendoza wasn't fleeing persecution. He was enforcing it. Venezuelan intelligence identified Mendoza as a Cartel de los Soles operative. His role was coordinating fentanyl distribution networks across the Midwest. DEA surveillance showed Mendoza meeting with Minneapolis drug traffickers within weeks of his asylum approval. He wasn't a refugee. He was an operative, and Judge Mahad had given him legal status. If this shocks you, hit like now. Federal agents identified the financial network behind the operation. Attorney Bashir Osman served as the middleman. He recruited asylum applicants, collected payments, coordinated with Judge Mahad. The money moved through Hawala networks. Traditional banking avoided. Cash transferred through trusted intermediaries. Payments settled across international borders without electronic records. But federal surveillance captured the physical exchanges. One recorded transaction showed Osman delivering $180,000 in cash to a warehouse in South Minneapolis. The money represented 12 asylum approvals processed that month. The warehouse belonged to Hassan Yusuf Ahmed, the same Ahmed arrested in the Maduro-linked raid. The Minneapolis connection. His network didn't just launder welfare fraud money. It facilitated immigration corruption. Judge Mahad received her payments through Ahmed's money service business. Transactions disguised as legal fees. Consulting payments. Real estate investments. Between January 2023 and November 2025, Mahad received $3.7 million through Ahmed's channels. Her judicial salary was $178,500 annually. The math didn't add up. But the corruption did. Type yes if you want to see what happened during the raid. The order came at 3:58 a.m. on January 14, 2026. Execute warrants simultaneously across 6 locations. Mahad's residence in Edina, her downtown chambers, Osman's law office, Ahmed's warehouse, 2 money service businesses, 0 media notification, complete operational blackout. At 4:12 a.m., federal agents approached Mahad's chambers. The building was empty. Security guards had been cleared hours earlier under false pretenses. Agents moved through darkened hallways. Tactical gear, night vision, evidence collection teams. The battering ram struck her office door at 4:14 a.m. Wood splintered. The reinforced lock shattered. Agents flooded the room. Guns drawn. Flashlights sweeping corners. The office was empty. But the evidence wasn't. Behind the judicial bench, agents found a false panel. Installed professionally. Hidden perfectly. Inside, a fireproof safe containing documents that would destroy Mahad's career. Ledgers listing names and amounts. Asylum applicants paired with payment figures. Dates matching court approvals. Handwritten notes in Mahad's distinctive script. Approved $15,000 received. Expedite $25,000 cleared. High risk $50,000 confirmed. This wasn't speculation. This was documentation. Share this so more people understand what was hidden in plain sight. Simultaneously, agents raided Mahad's Edina home. The residence was a $1.2 million estate. Lakefront property. Gated community. Far beyond her judicial salary. Mahad answered the door at 4:18 a.m. wearing a robe. Calm. Almost expecting them. Her hands raised slowly. No resistance. "I want my attorney," were her only words. Agents escorted her outside while search teams entered. The home was immaculate. Expensive furniture. Original artwork. Luxury vehicles in the garage. In the master bedroom, agents found 2 laptops. Encrypted communications with Osman and Ahmed. Messages discussing clients, and clearances, and pipeline operations. One message from September 2025 read, 12 cleared this week. Payment confirmed. Next batch arriving Tuesday. Another from October. High-value client needs expedite. Criminal history problematic. Requires $75,000 for processing. The laptops also contained banking records. Offshore accounts in UAE, Cayman Islands, Luxembourg. Total balances exceeding $8.9 million. A judge with $8.9 million hidden offshore. The money told the story prosecutors needed. If you believe accountability matters, comment justice below. Federal agents arrested Bashir Osman at his law office at 4:22 a.m. He was shredding documents when they entered. Papers scattered across the floor. A desperate attempt to destroy evidence. Too late. Agents seized 3 filing cabinets containing client records. Each file included asylum applications, payment receipts, and coordination notes. The system was methodical. Applicants paid Osman. Osman paid Ahmed. Ahmed paid Mahad. Everyone profited. Except American security. Osman's bank records showed $4.3 million in deposits over 24 months. Money moving through his attorney trust accounts. Payments disguised as legal fees for legitimate services. But the services weren't legitimate. They were criminal. In Osman's office, agents found communications with cartel recruiters in Venezuela, El Salvador, and Honduras. Messages discussing product placement and network expansion. The language was coded. The meaning was clear. Cartels were using Mahad's courtroom as an entry point into the United States. The asylum system was designed to protect the persecuted. Mahad had weaponized it to profit from the dangerous. At Ahmed's warehouse, agents discovered the financial hub. Computers tracking transactions across multiple networks. Ledgers documenting payments to Mahad, Osman, and dozens of others. The operation was vast, but the human cost was worse. Federal investigators traced approved asylum seekers to criminal activities across 8 states. fentanyl distribution, human trafficking, extortion networks, violence targeting immigrant communities. One approved applicant was arrested in Ohio in August 2025. His apartment contained 12 kilograms of fentanyl, enough to kill 6 million people. He had entered through Mahad's courtroom in March 2024. Another approved asylum seeker was arrested in Texas for coordinating a human smuggling operation. 18 migrants found in a locked trailer. 3 dead from heat exposure. He received asylum approval from Mahad in June 2024. The approvals weren't just corruption. They were enabling death. Comment your reaction to what you're seeing. Federal prosecutors scheduled a press conference for January 15, 2026. U.S. Attorney Andrew Lugar stood before cameras. Charts displayed behind him. Numbers, timelines, photographs. Today, we announce charges against Judge Layla Mahad, Attorney Bashir Osman, and 14 co-conspirators, Lugar began. This investigation uncovered systematic corruption of our immigration system. Asylum granted not based on merit, but on money. He presented the evidence. 847 fraudulent approvals. $3.7 million in bribes. 143 approved applicants with criminal histories. 67 linked to cartel operations. This wasn't isolated misconduct, Lugar stated. This was organized crime wearing judicial robes. The charges were extensive: bribery, conspiracy to defraud the United States, money laundering, immigration fraud, racketeering. Mahad faced up to 45 years in federal prison. But the fallout extended beyond courtrooms. Minneapolis erupted. Cedar Riverside. Downtown protests. Hundreds gathering outside federal buildings. Community leaders condemned the arrests. Called them targeted persecution. Demanded evidence review. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar released a statement. We must ensure justice is fair and not based on discriminatory targeting of immigrant communities. But federal officials pushed back. This wasn't targeting. This was evidence. The financial records were clear. The communications were explicit. The pattern was undeniable. If this story shocks you, share it widely. The raids exposed vulnerabilities in America's immigration system. How could a judge operate a criminal enterprise for years without detection? Federal oversight of immigration courts was minimal. Judges operated with broad discretion. Appeals were rare. Monitoring was limited. Mahad exploited every gap. She scheduled hearings during hours when oversight was minimal. Processed cases rapidly to avoid scrutiny. Communicated through encrypted channels to evade surveillance. The system assumed judicial integrity. Mahad betrayed that trust. But she wasn't alone. Federal investigators identified 11 other immigration judges under investigation for similar patterns. Unusually high approval rates. Applicants with minimal documentation. Financial irregularities. The corruption wasn't isolated to Minneapolis. It was systemic. Seattle, San Diego, Houston, Miami. Each city showed similar red flags. Judges approving asylum cases at rates far exceeding national averages. Applicants with suspicious backgrounds receiving legal status. Federal task forces were forming in each location. The Minneapolis case was exposing a national crisis. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Evidence from Mahad's case revealed coordination with cartel operations at disturbing levels. Messages between Osman and Venezuelan contacts discussed slots and capacity. One message from July 2025 read, "Judge can process 15 per month. Prioritize high-value placements. Payment up front as usual." Another from August. Capacity increasing. New judge recruited in San Diego. Expanding pipeline. The cartels weren't just bribing one judge. They were recruiting networks of corrupt officials. Federal prosecutors described it as immigration trafficking. Organized criminal enterprises purchasing legal status for operatives. Using America's humanitarian system as a weapon against American security. The Venezuelan government denied involvement. Called the charges fabricated. Claimed evidence was manufactured. But intercepted communications told a different story. Messages between Osman and individuals identified as Venezuelan intelligence operatives discussed political asset placement and strategic positioning. One message from September 2025 read, "Asset cleared through Minneapolis." Proceeding to Chicago network. Operational timeline accelerated. This wasn't asylum. This was infiltration. And Judge Mahad was the gatekeeper. Type accountability if you believe justice must be served. The human impact numbers were brutal. 847 fraudulent approvals. Each case representing a failure of the system designed to protect legitimate refugees. But the real victims were those denied justice. Legitimate asylum seekers waiting months for hearings. Families fleeing genuine persecution stuck in bureaucratic delays. Resources diverted to process fraudulent applications. One legitimate applicant testified waiting 18 months for her hearing. She fled domestic violence in El Salvador. Provided extensive documentation. Cooperated fully with authorities. Her case kept getting delayed. Meanwhile, Mahad was approving cartel operatives in 48 hours. The betrayal cut deep. Immigration courts were supposed to be sanctuaries for the vulnerable. Mahad turned them into profit centers for criminals. Federal victim assistance programs were overwhelmed. Hundreds of legitimate applicants whose cases were delayed by Mahad's corruption. Each deserved priority processing, expedited review, justice delayed. But the system was broken. Trust shattered. Reforms would take years. Mahad's trial was scheduled for August 2026. She faced 23 federal charges. Her defense team argued entrapment. Claimed federal agents manufactured evidence. Insisted Mahad was being scapegoated. But prosecutors had recordings, financial records, testimony from cooperating witnesses. The evidence was overwhelming. Bashir Osman agreed to cooperate. His testimony would detail the entire operation. How recruits were identified. How payments were structured. How Mahad coordinated approvals. In exchange, prosecutors recommended 15 years instead of 35. Osman's cooperation was devastating for Mahad. He provided messages, meeting notes, payment schedules, everything. The defense had no counter. Share this video before the full story disappears. Federal investigators continued tracing the network. Financial records showed connections to other corrupt officials. ICE officers who expedited processing. Clerks who falsified documents. Attorneys who recruited applicants. The conspiracy spanned 47 individuals across 6 states. Additional arrests were expected within weeks. Federal agents identified targets in California, Texas, Florida, Arizona, and Washington. The operation was national in scope. Treasury Department analysts froze $14.7 million in accounts linked to the network. Cash, cryptocurrency, real estate, luxury vehicles. But prosecutors estimated total proceeds exceeded $50 million. The majority remained hidden. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, cash holdings. Recovering stolen assets would take years. International cooperation, legal battles. Many victims would never see restitution. Meanwhile, the damage to America's immigration system was catastrophic. Public trust in asylum processes collapsed. Legitimate applications faced increased scrutiny. Processing times lengthened. Approval rates dropped. The corruption of one judge poisoned the entire system. Federal officials promised reforms. Enhanced oversight for immigration courts. Mandatory audits of judicial decisions. Financial disclosure requirements. Whistleblower protections. But reforms move slowly. Bureaucracies resist change. Political battles delay implementation. And criminals adapt faster than systems improve. Comment reform if you believe the system needs complete overhaul. The Minneapolis raids also exposed the connection to the broader Venezuelan network. Hassan Ahmed's operation wasn't just laundering welfare fraud money. It was facilitating multiple criminal enterprises simultaneously. Immigration fraud payments moved through the same channels as pandemic relief theft. The same shell corporations. The same offshore accounts. The same cryptocurrency wallets. Ahmed had built infrastructure that served every criminal network willing to pay. Federal prosecutors described him as a criminal services provider. His networks moved money for welfare fraudsters, immigration corruptors, narcotics traffickers, and sanctions violators. All using the same sophisticated laundering system. The marriage of fraud, corruption, and trafficking wasn't coincidental. It was intentional design. Ahmed's arrest disrupted all these networks simultaneously. Fraud schemes lost their laundering channels. Immigration corruption lost its payment infrastructure. Trafficking operations lost their financial pipeline. One arrest cascading across multiple criminal enterprises. Federal officials estimated the disruption cost criminal networks over $400 million in frozen operations. But the networks were already adapting. New launderers emerging. alternative channels developing. The fight continued. At Mahad's detention hearing, prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. Substantial financial resources hidden offshore. Connections to foreign nationals. No ties sufficient to ensure court appearance. The judge agreed. Mahad was remanded without bail. She sat in federal detention wearing an orange jumpsuit. Her judicial robes replaced by prison garb. Her gavel replaced by handcuffs. The fall was complete. Community reactions remained divided. Some defended Mahad, claimed she was being persecuted, argued evidence was fabricated, organized protests demanding her release. Others condemned her betrayal, felt deceived by someone they trusted, demanded accountability, called for systemic investigation. The complexity resisted simple narratives. If you're still watching, hit like to support this coverage. Federal investigators released additional details about approved asylum seekers involved in criminal activity. One individual approved by Mahad in April 2024 was arrested in November 2025 for operating a fentanyl distribution network in Minneapolis. His apartment contained 8 kilograms of fentanyl, distribution ledgers, communications with Mexican cartel suppliers. He had entered legally through Mahad's courtroom. Another approved applicant was arrested for human trafficking. 14 victims rescued from a South Minneapolis apartment, all held against their will, forced into prostitution. The trafficker received asylum approval from Mahad in January 2024. These weren't isolated incidents. Federal investigators documented 23 approved asylum seekers arrested for serious crimes within 18 months of receiving legal status. Crimes that could have been prevented if applications were properly vetted. The blood was on Mahad's hands. Federal sentencing guidelines for her charges suggested 30 to 45 years imprisonment. At 52 years old, Mahad faced spending the rest of her life in federal prison. Her attorneys filed motions challenging evidence collection, claimed constitutional violations, sought suppression of recordings and financial records. Legal experts predicted those motions would fail. Federal warrants were properly obtained. Surveillance was legally authorized. Evidence was admissible. The trial would proceed, and the evidence would convict. Type guilty if you believe the evidence speaks for itself. The broader implications extended beyond individual prosecutions. America's immigration system faced a crisis of legitimacy. How many other judges were corrupt? How many other cases were fraudulent? Federal authorities announced comprehensive reviews of asylum approvals from 2020 forward. Over 180,000 cases requiring examination. Each would be cross-referenced against criminal databases. Financial irregularities investigated. Suspicious patterns flagged. The review would take years. Cost tens of millions. Strain already limited resources. But the alternative was worse. Allowing criminal operatives to maintain legal status. Enabling continued exploitation of humanitarian systems. The review was necessary. The cost was unavoidable. Immigration advocacy groups expressed concerns. Legitimate asylum seekers could face renewed scrutiny. Applications already approved might be challenged. Families could be separated. The balance between security and compassion was delicate. Federal officials insisted legitimate cases had nothing to fear. Reviews would focus on clear red flags. Proper vetting protected both security and humanitarian obligations. But trust was broken. Anxiety was high. Communities felt targeted. The damage extended beyond statistics. Share this story so more people understand the full scope. Judge Mahad's case also raised questions about judicial accountability. Immigration judges operated with minimal oversight. No elected accountability. Limited appellate review. Broad discretionary authority. The system assumed integrity. Mahad proved that assumption was dangerous. Legal scholars called for reforms. Independent oversight boards. Mandatory decision audits. Financial disclosure requirements. Stronger whistleblower protections. Congress held hearings. Testimony from federal prosecutors, immigration advocates, former judges. The consensus was clear. The system needed reform. But political divisions complicated action. Immigration remained a polarizing issue. Reform proposals became partisan battles. Progress stalled in committee debates. Meanwhile, other corrupt judges continued operating. Other criminal networks continued exploiting vulnerabilities. The urgency was obvious. The response was inadequate. Hassan Ahmed's connection to Mahad's network added another layer. His money service businesses processed payments for immigration fraud, welfare fraud, and narcotics trafficking, all flowing through the same infrastructure. Federal prosecutors described it as a criminal ecosystem, each element supporting the others. Fraud funding corruption, corruption enabling trafficking, trafficking generating more money for fraud, a self-sustaining cycle of criminality. Breaking that cycle required simultaneous disruption of all elements. Ahmed's arrest accomplished exactly that. But the ecosystem was resilient. New nodes would emerge, alternative channels would develop. Federal authorities knew the fight would continue for years. Comment justice if you believe this fight matters. The Minneapolis story wasn't finished. Federal indictments continued. More arrests expected weekly. Asset seizures ongoing. Judge Mahad sat in detention awaiting trial. Bashir Osman cooperated with prosecutors. Hassan Ahmed faced multiple conspiracy charges. The network was exposed. The system was compromised. The damage was catastrophic. But accountability was coming. Federal prosecutors promised vigorous prosecution, maximum sentences, complete asset forfeiture. The message was clear. Corruption would not be tolerated. Justice would be pursued relentlessly. Whether that message would deter future corruption remained uncertain. Whether the system would implement meaningful reforms remained doubtful. Whether communities would rebuild trust remained unclear. What remained certain was simple. The fight for accountability continues. The battle against corruption persists. The demand for justice endures. And that requires people like you refusing to look away, choosing to stay informed, demanding action. Hit like if justice is worth fighting for. Comment what you think should happen to corrupt judges. Subscribe so you don't miss updates on this case. Share this video so the truth reaches more people. Because Judge Layla Mahad betrayed her oath, sold her authority, enabled criminals, endangered communities, 847 fraudulent approvals, $3.7 million in bribes, 143 criminals granted legal status. The numbers are brutal. The betrayal is complete. The reckoning has begun. This is only the beginning.